Sandra, I think we should be good to go now that it's 12:01.
Will we remove the image from the screen? Welcome, everyone. My name is Sandra Hawken, and I'm the president and CEO of the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our Dear Everybody 2020 Media Representation Panel Discussion. We have a really incredible agenda for you today. I am thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel, but want to start off with a little bit of context setting. For those of you who are new to Holland Bloorview, we're Canada's largest pediatric rehabilitation hospital. We're a teaching hospital and research institute, and soon we'll have the highest concentration of childhood disability research anywhere in the world. We're in the business of creating a world of possibilities for kids with disabilities, and a big part of that is about reducing disability stigma and creating a world where it's more inclusive for people with disabilities. We do that in close partnership with kids, youth, and families. And there's been no more meaningful way than the work that we've done with our annual anti-stigma Dear Everybody campaign. The Dear Everybody agreement and the Dear Everybody campaign that we're here to chat about today has really taken on an extraordinary momentum and has reached a tipping point. Last year, we challenged major brand advertisers across Canada to sign a pledge to increase the representation of people with disabilities in the images that they create that we all see every day. We expanded that request this year to include media makers of all kinds, and even just in the last 2 weeks alone, we've been delighted to see Rogers Communications, Rogers Sports Media, CBC, and Mastermind Toys sign the Dear Everybody agreement, along with many other brands that were already strong partners, like Roots, Bank of Montreal, TD, Capital One, Toyota, General Mills, CIBC, Scotiabank, and dozens more. Today, we've gathered a group of experts with a diverse perspective, all articulate and dynamic, I can assure you, to talk about why it's important that the 22% of Canadians that identify as having a disability are represented authentically in the images that we all see in the media landscape. Before I introduce the panel, I'll just start with a little bit of housekeeping. I want to let the audience know that the panel today is going to be recorded. So you'll have the opportunity, if you have to step away, to check on your kettle for the tea that you're brewing, or to be able to share it widely afterwards. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, in addition to those that we're going to be talking about today, please feel free to use the chat function in either Zoom or Facebook Live, and we'll make sure to get your question asked. And finally, we're going to be closed captioning this session live today using a new method. So we thank you in advance for your patience, and we're excited to make this accessible for all. I want to introduce our panelists, and I'll start off by apologizing that my eyes are going to be reading for a few moments, because it's important to all of us at Holland Bloorview that the panelists have introduced themselves in their own words. So I'm going to share with you their bios now. Our first panelist today, wearing his Dear Everybody t-shirt, is Arshile Egoyan. Arshile Egoyan is a writer, director, and producer born and based in Toronto. Having wrapped his first short film, Absence, he's currently in pre-production on his first feature-length movie. In addition to his film work, he's written an original series pilot and aspires to write for television. Arshile is interested in realizing stories which employ sensitivity and understanding in their exploration of challenging subject matter. Welcome, Arshile. The next panelist, you'll see in a moment why I think all of us should probably hire her to write our bios. Jay Baldwin. Jay is a 20-year-old cerebral palsy infused, non-binary, queer babe who currently resides in both the GTA and Ottawa. Jay enjoys writing, reading, listening to music, and drinking more tea than anyone their friends and family have ever met. You can always find Jay advocating for marginalized groups and making others smile on a daily basis. Welcome, Jay. Welcome also to Mari Ramsawakh. Mari Dev Ramsawakh is a disabled and non-binary freelance writer, podcaster, and creator that has been published on Insider, CBC, Them, Extra Magazine, Wear Your Voice Magazine, and other publications. They were the 2019 TVO Short Docs Contest winner, and they produced the podcast Sick Sad World and Crip Representation. Welcome, Mari. I'm also delighted to welcome Ty Young. Ty is 16 years old and attends Arts Unionville in the drama program. He has worked as an actor and model and believes that representation matters. Ty is a proud ambassador for Holland Bloorview. Thanks, Ty. And finally, last but certainly not least, representing the corporate signatories of the Dear Everybody Agreement, from Roots, we have James Connell. James Connell is the Chief E-commerce and Customer Experience Officer at Roots. He joined Roots over 20 years ago and has functioned in a number of roles, primarily focused in the areas of digital commerce, marketing, branded experience, and digital innovation. James has spoken to audiences, press, and industry journals on 3 continents, co-authored a book on global marketing leadership strategies, and was named Canadian Marketer of the Year in 2017 by the Canadian Association of Marketing Professionals. Thanks for joining us, James. As you can tell, it's quite an incredible powerhouse panel that we have. So let's dive right in. I'd love to hear from each of our panelists. Why is disability representation in the media landscape important? And what have you seen in terms of how media representation is currently happening? I'm going to kick us off with Mari.
Hi. The question was, why is disability representation important, right? So disability representation to me is really important because we are such a huge part of the population. I believe it's around 25% of people identify with disability, and considering how many people out there may not identify with disability but might still have the experiences, that number can be even greater. And it's really important to talk about these kinds of issues and to make sure that that representation also represents what those people's experiences actually are, including all different parts of their identities and not just focused on disability itself.
Thanks, Mari. Jay, what is your take on why disability representation in the media landscape is important?
Well, I've been alive for 20 years, and as I've grown up, I haven't seen many people like me in the media, and I don't think it's fair or okay because we are a big population, and like Holland Bloorview has said, people with disabilities deserve to be seen, and not just like in the poor disabled kind of way. We deserve to be seen as human beings, and the media has gotten better, but we still need to work a lot at it because there's a lot of us that still aren't getting represented and treated the way we deserve to be.
Thanks, Jay. Ty?
Yeah, so I think growing up for me, I've seen a lot of different, there's tons of people throughout all different types of films, but for people with disabilities, whenever I would watch my shows or anything, when I would see someone with a disability, I would be like, whoa, that's surprising. And I don't think it should be surprising. I think it should just be something that's normalized because my disability isn't my whole story, and neither should these characters. That shouldn't be their entire message. So, you know, it's important because it shows kids that they can be just like anybody else, disability or not, and they can, you know, do whatever they want. And it doesn't need to just be the fact that they maybe can't move the same way as someone else.
Well said. Thanks, Ty. Arshile?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to representing differently abled people in media, there's an special importance there beyond just reflecting society as it is and reflecting all the people and voices in it. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding and unknowns when it comes to the general public's perception of people who are differently abled. And I think that media allows us to explore some of those relationships and foster a sense of familiarity and understanding beyond what we might otherwise be used to. So it's a really exciting and important opportunity. And I think to pass on it is detrimental for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. James?
I think from my perspective, I agree a lot with what Ty was saying. I don't think we should ever undervalue the power of normalization, because people in media are seen as aspirational. And so if we include people with disabilities in media, we make them aspirational too. And I remember seeing, I identify as a gay man, and I remember the power of seeing the first gay actor that was identified as gay on screen. And that was really powerful to me. And I still remember that moment many years later. And so I think the fact that we potentially who work in positions where we have influence around what goes on in media really deserve to provide that same experience that I had as a gay individual to people with disabilities.
Terrific. Thanks you, James. In the conversations that we've had with many of the brands and media makers who've signed the Dear Everybody agreement, we often say, you know, if you have an image of 4 people in a restaurant or at a bank, why couldn't one of them be using a mobility device or use a prosthetic? And the answer is usually like, yes, why not? But that's not what we typically see. What I'm interested, and some of you have already touched on it, is to dive a little deeper about some of the stereotypes or the tropes or the tokenistic approaches that you've encountered about disability in the media culture that you'd like to see gone. This time, I'd like to start with Arshile.
I think some of the tropes just come from a lack of research and of understanding. And the problem with relying on tropes or defaulting to them is that it reflects our most base and uneducated assumptions about people. So the problem with relying on those tropes in media is that not only is it irresponsible, but it propagates something that's relative or that's completely unfounded in most cases. So yeah, I mean, I think it's every creator's responsibility to do due diligence and to understand the communities and people that they're reflecting, and to do that haphazardly or in kind of just relying on your assumptions is a huge problem. It's a real issue. So, I mean, I won't speak specifically on tropes. I think that we can imagine them, but I think, yeah, I just like to say that I think it's our responsibility to do the research and make a point to not rely on what we don't know, actually.
Thanks, Arshile. Mari, can you talk more about the stereotypes and tokenism and tropes from your perspective?
For sure. So one thing for me about like disability tropes in all forms of media is that they were often the reason I actually didn't identify with disability for a large part of my life. I didn't really see myself reflected in the tropes and the storylines that are often told about disabled people. Things like just focusing on the disability, the idea that only wheelchair users are disabled and everybody else are fakers or seeking attention, or even things like you know, we're just happy to have friends. We don't want sexual partners. We don't want, you know, all of these other aspects of life, or, you know, we're happy to be included. And that wasn't what my life looked like. And so for a very long time, because my disability was invisible, I kept it a secret, and it was very detrimental to my life and to my relationships and friendships. And so, yeah, like, moving away from those tropes and actually focusing on real stories and real experiences and what we actually go through and feel and think, which is such a broad array of things. As I said before, there are so many different identities that we all have. We don't share all the same identities. And so if we moved away from those tropes, we can get at some like actually relatable storylines that we can actually understand.
You made several excellent points, Marianne. One of the lines that was written by Holland Bloorview Youth in our current campaign is something to the effect that not every disability is visible, but everyone should be visible. So I appreciate you raising that and the many other points. Jay.
I myself see a lot of stigma and tropes about disability in the media, and because of that, I've always had trouble, like even as a young child, believing that people actually want to be friends with me, not because I'm physically disabled, but because I'm actually a good person with good points who deserves to have stable relationships. And from the media and the way they project disability as people being vegetables or incompetent or they can't hold a relationship, that kind of ruined me, and that's a lot of the reason why I have so much trouble now with mental illness and actually believing that I deserve to be treated better than the way the media treats us. And what really annoys me is when people in the media, like actors and stuff who don't have disabilities, portray people with disabilities. I don't know, I find it really offensive because it's like, if you don't have a disability, it makes it seem like you're mocking that person just to get money out of it. And it's not fair, because people with disabilities deserve to be the disabled character in every story.
I'm voting for Jadine for president. I don't know about the rest of you. Thank you, Jadine. Couldn't agree more and appreciate that so much. And the chat's blowing up with your fan base. James, your thoughts?
I mean, I equate it to the way media used to portray, or I should say international media used to portray Canadians. I mean, Canadians were all in Mounties, we lived in igloos, and it snowed all year round. Imagine what happened to Canadian stories if we always went down to that same level of understanding about who Canadians are. And that's sort of my best way of explaining the fact that we're missing out on a lot of stories and people and relationships if we don't dive down a little bit further past the surface level and really start to understand that people with disabilities are people too. They have lives that are interesting, and they're creative, they're magnificent and beautiful. I mean, I work in an industry in apparel and fashion that really, in a lot of ways, helps identify or helps define what the perspective of beauty is. And we're seeing the fact that people who are disability, we need to remember that people that have disabilities are beautiful too. And we need to be inclusive of everyone. And so I think if we're in a situation where we can get past that little sort of very narrow definition of what it means to be a person with a disability and how they can represent themselves in media, then we can really start to understand and appreciate people a whole lot more across everything. And I hope that by the media doing that, it sort of spreads past that part into something that's much more broad and accepted going forward.
Thank you, James. Ty, you and I have had a chance to talk about this several times before. I've learned a lot from you on perspectives around tokenism, especially. Love to hear what you have to say.
Definitely. So yeah, you know, honestly, I think everyone did a really great job and said a lot of things that I would say. You know, some of the specific things that I have encountered, and I may have touched on this in my answer before, was just, you know, always giving this sad storyline like we need a hero, or, you know, at the end of the episode, the main character saves the day by standing up for this person or giving them the prom crown. It's like, you know, I don't, like, why, you know? It's really, I guess the word's like othering. It's making it like it's not showing that people with disabilities can also accomplish these things on our own and be independent. And I also think it's extremely important, like James said, within not just TV shows and movies, but also within fashion, within advertisements, because this is all part of normalizing. And it's not just like, oh, look, we added a character with a disability, we're inclusive. Like, that's not it. That's not solid representation.
Thanks, Ty. Several of our panelists have already touched on the idea that of intersectionality and the various identities that each of us walk and move through the world with. And so this next question is specifically for Jay, Ty, and Mari. And I'd love to ask you to speak to your unique experience as a person with intersectional identities in a world with inaccessibility and stigma. I'm going to start with you, Jay.
Well, to start off, I was actually the one that thought of this question, and we all kind of touched on it, which was really cool, and I was really happy because, yeah. And as I grew up, I identify as Black, queer, and physically disabled, and I face a lot of stigma because of that. And I've been called the N-word, I've been called crippled, I've been called faggot numerous times for being who I want to be in the world, and it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And I feel like I want to be the person I am, no matter what. So even on my bad days, I walk out into the world and I walk proud because, well, I roll actually. I roll proudly because I know that at the end of the day, as long as I know who I am and myself, nothing else, nobody else's opinions about me will matter, because I can sit tall in the fact that I love myself and am choosing to beat myself no matter what obstacles I face. And I guess being me, that has taught me a lot. And it's taught me to be resilient and keep going and never stop believing in myself. Because even when you think that nobody's on your side, there's always people cheering you on.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you for suggesting this question when we co-created this panel together. It is an important one, and so is your voice. Ty, what are your thoughts on this one?
You know, I feel like it's really important, like Jay said, to have people around you who will lift you up and always support you. In my own life, excuse my dog there, I have been very lucky to have that group and be able to always be supported and respected based on all of my identities. Personally, I don't like using labels and I don't like, you know, doing that, but that's just my own personal opinion. And yeah.
Ty and Ty's dog. Mari?
Yeah, like I think it is really important to talk about intersectionality no matter what. You know, it was a term coined by like a Black queer feminist, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's something that I try to in all communities and spaces that I am a part of, because I am part of so many and have so many intersectionalities. As someone who does identify as queer, as trans, as disabled, as Indo-Caribbean, and all of these identities make up who I am. And yeah, like my experiences versus Jay's experiences versus Ty's experiences versus, you know, any other disabled person that I meet, our experiences, you know, I've come across so many different ways that we have lived our lives, the different ways that people react to us. We, like, disabled people aren't treated the same across the board, and I think that's really important to talk about. You know, as Jay alluded to with their experiences, like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all of these things still exist even when you're disabled. And the truth is that in disability representation, we're often shown a small sliver of our community instead of all the different experiences that we do have. And it's important to actually see and talk about those things, because often the most marginalized are often the most underrepresented, and their issues are often left to as kind of the last thing that will get there eventually, sort of a thing. And it's important that we put those issues up front, because if we advocate for the most marginalized of us, we are fighting for everybody in our community.
Thank you, Mari. We absolutely can't be talking about equal, diverse, inclusive, accessible representation without doing it with an intersectional lens. So what does authentic representation look like? We've talked about what it doesn't look like and why it's important. What would be the utopia? Ty, you want to kick us off?
For sure. So I think, always casting individuals who can accurately and, understand what this character may be going through because of their own life experience, and authentically cast. So if you're casting a character who maybe uses a wheelchair, find an actor that uses a wheelchair, because they can bring their own perspective and they can accurately portray what needs to be done. And I think that would just change so much, because a lot of the times characters are cast by actors without disabilities, and that's when they amp up all of these tokens, all of these stigmas and everything, and that's what causes the issue.
Thanks, Ty. James, from a brand marketer's perspective, what's your take?
I think from a brand perspective, it's what you do when no one's looking. And I think it's really important, as much as, participating on this panel is really an honor. And I'm actually intimidated by some of the life experiences that some other people have had that I'm speaking amongst. For us, this journey started as a result of a conversation internally about a year ago, when we were planning out our holiday campaign. And we thought, wouldn't it be great to have a campaign where everyone was nice together? And that included people from different races, religions, backgrounds, identities, and that included people with disabilities. And I would say that it was a really nice, sort of an almost surprising, frankly, experience that so many people were so welcoming of this campaign, and thought, wouldn't it be great to continue to move forward and have more of a dialogue with our customers, because really, as a brand, we feel like we represent Canadians as a total, and almost all Canadians can find something that they could wear in one of our stores. And so, wouldn't it be great if our marketing actually represented that? And we feel like being an authentic brand means doing everything we can to represent everyone. So I would say we haven't managed to get as far as we wanted to, based with all the challenges we've had with COVID-19. But I'm really excited by the fact that we have partnered with Holland Bloorview, and you'll start to see images of people with disabilities on our website over the next couple of weeks. And we can continue to move forward and progress on an ongoing basis, because, and I feel like I'm rambling now, I apologize. But I think, when you look at authenticity, it has to be something that's past, the dialogue needs to go past the disability itself, and the fact that people are doing things that are more than just being challenged by their disabilities is, I think, where we need to go as an industry and also as a brand and a company.
Thanks, James, and thanks so much for Roots leadership. Mari, as a media maker and a person with lived experience and an articulate activist, I'd love to know your perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to me about authentic representations is about the little details and the small things. The little decisions that we have to make about managing our time and our energy throughout the day, having what kind of routes we take when we travel to work or school or to visit friends and family, because there are so many parts of disability that isn't just like, oh, my life's hard because of disability, that impact our life, but doesn't take up all of it. And we could have so many like different kinds of storylines with disabled people in them, you know, romance plots or dramas or thrillers or whatever, but still have these little things included to, you know, actually show what our lives are like and how those little decisions that we make, the little differences in our lives actually can be like an advantage or a benefit, or it could be, you know, show that we have flaws, and we're imperfect and we deal with things not always the greatest way, and you know, we're just all different, and you know, it's important to tell the stories of how we actually live and not just how people think we live.
Thank you, Mari. Jay, authentic representation, what does that mean to you?
It means being able to be who I am despite all obstacles. And it means seeing myself in all forms of life. And by that, I mean seeing myself in the media, seeing myself be able to get into places because they finally have a ramp, seeing myself in stable relationships where people don't have to look at me and wonder why are they with that person when they could be with someone that's able-bodied. Like, for instance, I'm seeing someone right now currently and they are able-bodied, and we were out in public and the whole time people were just staring at us. And I felt really, really uncomfortable because it's like, I want authentic representation and I don't want people to have to look at me and wonder why that person's with me. I want them to just be happy that I found someone beyond all the obstacles, beyond all my flaws, beyond everything, and just be like, wow, I wish I could be as happy as they are with that person. And I just feel like it's really unfair that in 2020 there isn't authentic representation of people like me. Like, for instance, there was a doll that just came out who's in a wheelchair. And my friend bought me that doll because she knows I didn't have one. And I was like, wow, if only I had this at 10 years old, I probably wouldn't be so insecure now. And I just think, like Mari said, the little things matter most. People need to be educated about us and hear from us, and not just from other people who think they know what it's like to be me, even though they don't. So I think that just comes with being able to be myself no matter what.
Absolutely. You can't be what you can't see. Thank you, Jay. Now, Arshile, you've been talking about this an awful lot over the last couple of weeks on a media junket for your film. And I know this is an issue you're especially passionate about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for me, I mean, authentic representation in the context of producing a film really starts at the research level. It's one of the first, actually, it probably is the first thing that any creator should be considering and exploring when they decide to commit to a project that represents differently abled people. Because as a person that doesn't identify as differently abled, there's a whole world and perspective that I need to understand before I can even start to conceptualize a story or conceptualize an approach. And that's why my relationship to Holland Bloorview became so important, because you guys had that network, you had that expertise, you were, you know, in the front lines when it came to research and programming. So it's an obvious answer in some ways. It just comes, like, authentic representation happens as one of the first things that a creator does, and it's just research, and it's access, and it's accessing people who are differently abled, the people around them, and just committing to really listening and taking time and just absorbing it all, because there's a lot to absorb. I think even just it's evident just in this conversation alone, like the perspectives that we're getting from Jay, Ty, and Mari are, like, they're enriching and they're important. So to take time to do that before thinking about anything else, I think that's the first step. And then, of course, authentic casting. It was a funny thing for me when people would, you know, say that I had done a good thing by casting a differently abled person as that character, because it was never, I never considered doing it any other way. It seemed bizarre to even think about casting a person who wasn't differently abled as a character who was. So certainly, you know, the fact that that's even something at this point that people do, I think, is odd. So that needs to change, absolutely. But then aside from authentic casting, I'd say, yeah, just putting in the hours and the days and the weeks and months to make sure that what you're telling is true to the people that it's about.
Thanks, Arshile. We have a question from the audience that I'm going to interject for our panel. The question is, from your perspective, how can organizations, businesses, and companies be more inclusive and sensitive to the barriers that people with disabilities experience in the day-to-day of living? What types of barriers or situations prevent more inclusive interaction between people with and without disability? So I'd love to start this one with Jay.
I think for me, it's just companies, organizations, and everything like that just need to be present in the fact that we are not all the same, and not all people with disabilities are able to have access to certain things. So you just have to be mindful that everyone's different. And just because so-and-so can walk up a flight of stairs doesn't mean that I can with my wheelchair. Like, all disabled people have unique needs. And I think that in order to be more inclusive, we need to ask more questions like this to more disabled people that aren't just people who can walk and use a walker. We need to start asking people who are in wheelchairs, who are amputees, who are every different aspect of disability, because it's not good to only base it off of one, because when you make assumptions like that, people lose out.
Thanks, Jay. James, as someone who's in a company that's working on these issues, what do you think?
I think really it goes down to having conversations like this, and really trying to understand what people who are differently abled can deliver, and what those people actually want from us. I think a lot of times people are afraid to have those conversations, and so as a result, we sort of assume what people want or need, and that often with assumptions, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be wrong. So I think making sure that is a consideration when you're building a store or designing something, I think is an incredibly important piece, and consulting with people who have disabilities to make sure that your intentions are right and on the right track, as opposed to just making assumptions and going astray, I think is incredibly important.
Thanks, James. Including it is key. You know, at Home Bloorview, we've been having a lot of conversations about our own organization, and there's been a significant amplification about EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion. Actually, the language we use at Home Bloorview is IDEA, IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So it's mindfully including it at the outset and always. Arshile?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna let the rest of the panel take this one.
No problem. Ty, anything you want to add?
For sure. So yeah, I think asking questions is the most important thing, and also being open to adapting and uncomfortable answers, because we're not always going to hear things that we expect or that we want to hear. And like everyone said, everybody's different. We all have our own unique perspectives, so you never know what people's needs are. And really the best thing you can do is just be able to adapt and be able to go with the flow and figure it out depending on who you're working with.
Thanks, Ty. The next question is specifically for Arshile and James. What made you sign the Dear Everybody agreement, and why is it important to you and to your company? I'm going to start with you, Arshile.
For me, again, it was an obvious choice. It was an easy commitment to make, because the work that Holland Bloorview was doing kind of perfectly aligned with what I wanted to do with the film. And especially as Holland Bloorview just became a really strong ally, and I learned more about their work, it was exciting. It was exciting to be around an organization that was moving things in the right direction and that had a really strong and defined approach. So to be able to sign on was an honor, and yeah, it was an easy decision.
And we're so grateful that you did.
Yeah.
James, let's talk about Roots.
I think for Roots, it was coincidentally around the same time we were talking about the holiday campaign that we became aware of the agreement. So it was a nice epiphany for a number of people on the team that this was happening. And I think for us, one of the biggest reasons why we decided we wanted to sign was we really wanted to make sure that, one, we were holding ourselves publicly accountable, and two, we were actually having benchmarks to reach for. And it also allows us to have a platform that we can reach out to other businesses as well. So for example, we've had a number of conversations with modeling agencies now, asking them for help recruiting and talenting people who are differently abled that we've never had before. And we're sort of stretching their networks as well, because they typically aren't asked those questions. So I think just even having that conversation, and the fact that the conversation is happening is sort of validating in the fact that it was an important agreement to sign, and an agreement that actually could potentially make a lot of change in this industry, in this space for people.
James, while you were talking, another question came in for you specifically, asking what changes you've seen in the industry, or perhaps what changes you've led since you've taken your position.
It's sort of hard to say from a macro perspective. I would say overall, my personal experience with marketing is over 20 years. And so I think a lot of people on the panel, really probably are much more aware, frankly and candidly, of what's going on with the space than I am. What I will say is that given the fact that I feel like Netflix and other streaming platforms, as well as the media in general, is less focused on the ideal sense of beauty and perfection, and a lot more about authenticity. And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that we have access to so much more content than we ever have had before. And we can pretty much select our personal TV network that we didn't used to be able to do. I mean, I grew up in an environment where I had access to 2 TV channels and a third that was in French that I didn't really understand at the time. So it was either Dallas or Dukes of Hazzard. And so, knowing the fact that I can go onto Netflix and choose from thousands of pieces of content that, one, represents my interests and represents people that look like me and have lives like mine, I think it is something that all content creators need to really adapt to and work towards, because there is more demand in the marketplace. So I think from that regard, there's a lot of change. I think from a roots perspective, it's something that's actually part of the casting conversation on a regular basis now, where it hasn't been in the past. And diversity and inclusion is something that organically we have done to a certain degree in the past, but I think now as we sort of progress and see the fact that consumers are responding to it much more positively than we'd feared, and it's not as groundbreaking or scary as we thought it might be at times. It really allows us to really dive into it a whole lot more and make sure that we are doing as a default setting as opposed to a sort of a special effort, so to speak.
Thanks, James. Mari, I'd love your take on this, and also your perspective on the last question where my system failed me in not getting around to you.
Do you mind repeating the question just so I remember?
Yeah, so we were in the last question, one of our audience members asked about what companies and businesses and individuals should do in terms of making businesses more inclusive and making interactions between people with and without disabilities in the best way they can be.
Great. Yes. So for that one, I believe that in all honesty, that organizations and businesses need to go beyond consulting and research, and they need to include people all abilities of all races and genders at the highest decision-making levels in all aspects of their business and their companies. It's great to consult and to ask questions and have these conversations, but we need to go beyond that, and we need to actually be involved and actually be a part of the systems that we're trying to create to benefit us, because it's not benefiting us if we're not actually in control of it. And yeah, sorry, Mari, keep going. No, yeah, and was there another question you wanted my take on?
Well, the next question is actually for you, Ty, and Jay. So it's sort of a two-parter. The first is, what are some barriers that you've faced with whether it's getting roles in the media or working in the industry? And is there anyone in the media that you look up to that are representing people with disabilities authentically? You get to start, Mari.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest barriers about getting into the industry is actually that it's hard to get into these entry-level roles as a disabled person. Of the types of roles that I am good at, that don't involve a lot of manual labor, or things that I'm not able to do, are often mid-level to senior level roles. And there aren't a lot of entry-level roles, especially in media creation. A lot of jobs for production assistants or being on crew involve, needing a G license or being able to carry heavy equipment. And you don't get to, if you're not able to get those roles, you're not able to get the kind of ground up experience that everybody else in the industry is able to get. And so it does make it difficult to actually break into the industry and grow and develop because you sort of have to figure out a way to jump from being nobody into these mid-level roles just because they're the only ones that will accommodate remote working or other things like that.
Is there anyone, Mari, that you look up to or that you think are doing it well?
I mean,
it's okay to not have an answer.
The series special on Netflix was major. It had major impact for me. It was written by a queer disabled man. And he was about sexuality, and it was, you know, about all of these things that I would like for us to talk about when it comes to disability. So that's sort of the type of thing that I want to see more of, is us, you know, in the production, and not just in front of the camera, behind the camera too.
Thanks, Mari. Ty, talk to me about some of the challenges you've had getting roles and who you look up to.
So for me, as someone who wants to go into acting and theater, there's quite a few barriers that I have to face in terms of, you know, just, it all starts with an audition. And even going to auditions, a lot of the times there's like a massive step to get in, or these like ramps that need to be pushed up. And it's like, if you're casting people with disabilities, why are you not making these audition places accessible? Like it doesn't make any sense. And also sometimes a lot of theaters aren't accessible. I know I love to watch shows and to go see them live. And like, there's literally 4 spots in the audience that I can easily access and sit at. And like, what if I want to sit front row? Do I have to crawl all the way down? It's like, I feel like they should be making all of these workplaces for the audience and for the actors, so they can get into the stage door, they can get to the stage. Like, all of these things need to be considered, because people with disabilities can play these roles and we can be on stage, but people don't realize that because they think we can only put, you know, these other actors to play disabilities, and it's not right. So I think something that they can do, or casting directors can do, is realize that if we're open to all possibilities for any role, anyone of any ability can play anything, you know, of course, best actor, but also do it authentically. And I just want to read one thing that someone said in the comments, which I really thought was great. And it was that a lot of times when I get asked questions about my disability and I give an answer, people don't always believe me because they don't think that I can, even though I say, I can, and they're like, oh, are you sure about that? And it's like, no, you have to believe me. I know my body best, and that's something that should be noted.
And is there anyone that you think are doing it well, Ty?
For sure. So Ali Stroker, of course, she's amazing. She won a Tony, I think it was this year, last year. She's incredible. She is doing exactly what I want to do in the future, and she's such an inspiration to me.
She so is, but worth noting that there was not a ramp up to that Tony stage.
Yes.
Award.
Yeah, that was crazy. Like, what? It's so crazy. I don't know.
Thanks, Ty. Jay?
I think for me, the barriers that I have is like, I want to be a part of things, but I have to realize that I don't get out much because things are inaccessible. And I've been asked to like, I've had to make my own documentaries and stuff like that, and do things my own way in order for things to actually be accessible to me. Because people always invite me to things and ask me to do things like within acting or within public speaking or anything like that. And a lot of the times it's not actually accessible to me to get in that place. So it's like pointless. And even in my daily life, like, I'll have to call places ahead of time, like 7 times before I actually leave my house to make sure they're accessible. And that's not the way it should be. And I find that people with disabilities are some of the most accepting and inclusive group of people that you'll ever meet, but then other people can't be inclusive with us, and it's unfair because I feel like it should be a two-way street, and it isn't. And I also find that a lot of people don't see people with disabilities as being the type of talent you want in the media or in a movie or whatever, it's always there's a side character, and they shouldn't be if you're basing a movie off of them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And for those of you who are booking public speakers, Jay Dean is one of the most extraordinary public speakers in all the land. And if your space is not accessible, you're missing out.
Thank you so much. And I just quickly wanted to say that I've found a lot of people that are actually doing this well. My main ones are, I don't know if anyone's heard of Wheelchair Rapunzel. I love her. She's great. She has SMA, is an activist. Everything's good. I just love her. And Erin Phillip, she's a model with CP, and I just find that really cool because she's also Black and trans, and it's so good. It's so good. I love the two of them so much.
Great picks. We have one last question, and then I want to make sure we have time to go around and be able to give a final word from our panelists. Jillian asks, how do you feel when media such as TV and movies make disabilities more dramatic for the sake of the movie? Does anyone want to take that? We might not have time for everyone. I'll just see if anyone is particularly passionate about that question. Jack.
I find that a lot of times it's like that, where people make people with disabilities seem more dramatic than we actually are, and it actually annoys me and makes me lose interest in whatever I'm watching, because that's not our reality. We're not like these awful people who can't do anything for ourselves and need people at our back and foot all the time. Yes, we may need help, but that doesn't mean we're not completely capable of being human beings in society.
Thank you, Jay. So I want to make sure that we end by giving our panelists the last word. So I'm going to go around each of you and ask for one last quick thought about what you'd like our viewers and listeners to have as their key takeaway or something to think about. And I'm going to start with you, Mari.
I think, yeah, the big key takeaway that I want our audience to walk away with is that disability is such a broad spectrum, and there's so many experiences out there, and we just need to be able to see those experiences and hear about those experiences just in all aspects of media.
Thanks, Mari. Arshile?
Yeah, no, I'm incredibly grateful for this conversation. I think it was very elucidating, and I think yeah, just to make a point to find more conversations like this and to learn more. I think always to learn more and to yeah, to take in what people with different lived experiences have to say about them. I think that's one of the beautiful things, if not the most beautiful thing about filmmaking, but also just storytelling in general, is that we have the opportunity to understand other lives that aren't our own. And I think when we have that opportunity, it's important to lend it to everyone so that we can, as a public, can have that access, but also to give people that access as well. So yeah, just a big thank you to everyone on the panel and to Holland Bloorview.
Thanks, Arshile. Ty?
I just want to say thanks to everyone for listening in and hearing all of our stories and what we want to say. Something that I would want everyone to take away from this is just that, people with disabilities are no different than the media makes us out to be. And, we can say all of these things, we can fight as much as we can, but it's going to take people who are able-bodied to help make these changes happen. And once that can happen, the world will be a much better place for all of us.
Hear, hear. Thanks, Ty. James, Roots, last thoughts?
I echo a lot of the sentiments other people had. I feel like I've learned a lot just being part of this conversation. I would say, in closing, we're all human, and as a result of that, we all have value. And just spending a little time to listen and learn about someone else's experience can also be so enlightening and educational that it really has a lot of value. And so, if you're someone who has the ability and it is in the media and is a decision maker, spend the time to actually learn to meet someone, and your perspective might change. And you might be an advocate when you didn't actually expect to be, to make change in the industry, which, when you have the ability to make change and make things better for someone else, it's so powerful, and it also makes you feel so much better about your daily life, that it's a completely worthwhile investment, both personally and professionally.
Thanks, James. And the powerful last word to Jay.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for listening and being here with us, and for being present in these conversations, because it's really important to make the world a better place. And y'all are amazing and so loved, and we as the disabled community appreciate it more than you could ever understand. And as a final last word, don't be ableist, because I'm allergic to ableism.
Love it. There's been an outpouring of support and enthusiasm for this extraordinary conversation today in the chat. Much appreciation and gratitude for each of you sharing so candidly and bravely and articulately. When Holland Bloorview first set out to really kick off this movement, in particular the Dear Everybody Agreement, we were very mindful of the fact that by walking through the community, by rolling through the community and not seeing images of everybody that lives in Canada, if a group is absent from the landscape of the visual images that we're all consuming, so too are they absent from our imagination and our ability to see someone as a potential partner, a friend, a coworker, a leader, which is why it's so important that we're advocating, we're raising our voices, amplifying voices of those with lived experience like Jay, Ty, and Mari, and partnering with those in the industry and brand leaders like Arshile and James. So grateful on behalf of everyone at Holland Bloorview that the 5 of you lent your wisdom and your voice to this conversation today. I hope it's the first of many. I know we gave the community a lot to think about today, and I hope that while they're thinking, they also take action. To learn more about the Dear Everybody campaign, you can go to deareverybody.ca, and I'd encourage you to share our campaign on Instagram. There's some adorable stickers that are very Insta-worthy, and we would love you to be identifying brands and media makers that you think should be including disability in the picture. Thanks again, everyone. Together we can make this better.